Alright, let's get this show on the road. I have opened our studio and let's set up first a new project. We click on the file on new project. It will open up this beautiful little window. We click on new directory. And then I want to create a new project. How should we label it? Maybe awesome R exercise. Cool. And I want to actually keep it on my desktop, right? So it's going to be on my desktop, and I say create project. And hooray, it opens up beautifully in my RStudio window. One thing I have to do now is please copy your data file into your RStudio project folder. Yeah, so I'm going over there, and voila, if you click on your folder, you should now see our dataset talus in there. Right, let's switch back to R. And so what we want to do now is we want to open a new R script window. Fantastic. We can make all sorts of annotations if we use the hash key and say, this is my new window for getting started. The first thing we always have to do is we have to install packages. So we can call this install packages. If we want to install a couple of them, we can, for example, include them with this particular command. And I want to get car, I want to get the psych package. Those are the two packages that we will need for the session today. I already have them, so I don't need to install them, so I can call them directly, going by library, now car, and it is loading the car package, and library psych, and it is loading the psych package. Obviously, well, if we wanted to, we could now also include a quick note saying, this is how I install packages. Whoops, sorry. This is how I install, how I load packages for me to use in a session. So now, importantly, we have to get our data in. We have it here. We see it is there. So we now have to call it into our little session here. So I could say read in my data. We need, as I told you before, R is an object-oriented language. So we are going to create a new object which contains our data. So I call my data, and with this little arrow I want to now read CSV. Oops, apologies. And I'm going to read in my data. As you can see here, the file is called talus.csv. So I write talus.csv, and I want to include the variable name, so header equals true. So that will read in the variable names into my new object. So if we wanted to see what is in our object, we could actually just type out my data, and then again Control Enter. It will show us all the data down here. It's not very useful in a way. So I could ask, so how many rows are there? So how many participants are in my data set? So I could type this, and we can see 3,000 people are in my data set. I could ask how many columns are there, so how many variables, and voila, we see there are 14 variables in there. Fantastic. But you can imagine a lot of data is often really messy. There's lots of missing information. So we need to deal with these missing data points in our data set, because if we don't do it, R will get really confused. So we can actually do this while reading in our data. So I can go back up here, read in my data, and remove missing data. What I need to do in this case is I will need to add a command here that tells R which observations are actually missing. So I can say NA strings, and then basically the little C basically means I want to put a number of different options together, C, and then I want to say anything where we have a missing observation. So there's basically a point, an empty cell in our data set, and any observation where we have a 999. So now if I go Control Enter again, it will read in my data again. I could ask for all these different options again, but I want to now just get a summary of my data. And voila, what you can see now here down at the bottom is all the observations that are missing. So NAs, so for example 14 observations are missing for this particular variable. So hooray, we got it in. But as you can see here already, like those labels are pretty long and cumbersome. If you had a look at your spreadsheet and the data coding sheet, you can see what these individual variables stand for. But like we have to type them out each individual time. So the best option for us is to actually rename those variables to make them a little bit more like convenient for our cases. So what we could do is we could rename our variables. So we want to do something with the names. So we go names, my data. We want to change them, right? So we can now again say with this little C, we want to rename all the variables. So ID country, we want to maybe just call it country. Then we have TT2G01 that, if we look into our spreadsheet, is actually let's call it sex. Then the next variable in our spreadsheet, if you have a look at it, that's actually how old people are. Then we have, for example, employment status, and then we have all these individual variables. And to help us identify it in the data set later, we just maybe remove all these TT2G46 and just stick with the final with the final letters, because they help us to like type faster as we go along. Oops, you should always have it. Important here, we always want to have it in quotation marks, because that will tell R that it is looking for, or that it is basically a character that we want to assign as the name of our column, right? So that should be all of it. So if I now go like this, and I just want to see what happens, so I can type out names, my data now. Et voila, it is there. But now, as you can see, that's we might not want to always, just to give you an example, we may not want to type everything out all the time. So we can actually make that shorter. So we could go my data, and we want to only recode columns 1, 2, 3. So in square brackets we put columns 1, 2, 3. And being good psychologists, we want to basically ID country, and we know we shouldn't look at sex at something biological, so we say gender, and how old people are, it's actually age. So we do this, we again Control Enter. If we go now names, my data, voila, it has changed it. Fantastic. So we just say renaming, so just to remind us what we did here, renaming my variable in my data set. Fantastic. Cool. So we got this done. Now, as you see in your spreadsheet, the country variable is coded in numbers, but we actually want to have it as a categorical variable. So a categorical variable in R is called a factor. And what we could do is we could go, for example, my data, $, ID country. So that identifies, the $, identifies what column in our data set we want to manipulate. And, oops, apologies. And we want to now say, please treat ID country as a factor. So we make it as a categorical variable. So factor, we say my data, what variable needs to be treated as a factor. So ID country. Then we need to say what levels we have in our data set. Oops. And we have basically three numbers. We have 416. Oh, apologies. We have 410. We have 616. And we have 620. And now we have to say what this actually stands for. So we have to give it a label name. Again, now we put it like this. We have to now use quotation marks again. So the first one is South Korea. The second, 616, is Poland. And the third one is Portugal. Hooray. So we want to run this and see whether it actually worked. Again, Control Enter. And we could now call, for example, call a summary of just my data. My data, $ID country, to see whether it worked. And voila! Now we can see we have 1,000 participants from South Korea, 1,000 from Poland, 1,000 from Portugal. Now, a few extra little things that will become very, very handy as we go along. For example, we could now want to, for example, look at just the items that measure satisfaction with the profession. So we could put them into a separate data set. So we, for example, data, oops, why are we up here? Apologies. So we could go like my data profession, right? So we want to now move or create a new data set that has essentially all the items that measure satisfaction with the profession. So I want to copy the ones from my data over. I want to subset, so I'm using square brackets, and then I go C again, normal brackets, and I want to move over all those that measure satisfaction with the profession. So that's A, B, it is D. Look at your spreadsheet or your coding sheet. F and H. Oops, sorry. H. Cool. Let's see if that actually worked. So we could again, for example, we could ask for a summary, my data, profession, and you can see now we only have the data from these 5 variables there. So in psychology, we often want to use scales, and an important concept for scales is the reliability. There's one little package that can, there are actually a number of packages we could use for that. I'm going to use the psych package. There is a very good function called alpha, so for Cronbus alpha, and we need to say what variables or what data set we want to use for that. So we want to use my data profession, and we have to tell R now how these variables are coded, because if you look back at your data sheet, some of these variables are coded in a positive way, some of the items are coded in a negative way. So we need to basically identify what are the positively and negatively coded items. So the A is positively coded, B is also positively coded, D is negatively coded, so basically reverse coded, F also, and H. So if we do this, let's see what happens. We run. Ooh, what happened here? Can you see my mistake? Exactly. It should be like this, because in our keys we just say in which direction these are coded. So now let's run it again. And the important part here is the raw alpha up here, and we also have a number of other statistics. If you want, I'm going to put up a link so you can look at all the other options that you get here. It's not so important for us right now, but overall it looks great. We have a scale that works well with a high reliability across those 3 samples. Now, if we wanted to create a mean, obviously we have to recode those items. How can we do this? For that, we can use the car package. If we want to recode our items, we now need to create a new variable. We want to, for example, my data profession $, and let's say we want to recode the D variable, and to make it really clear for us, we say dr, so recode it. And how do we recode this? With the car package. So I could actually call the car package with this option car : and then we recode it. It's not rocket science really. So now we want to say my data profession. What variable do we actually want to recode? D. And how do we want to recode it? What we need to do now is we need to apologies, I shouldn't have this. We want to recode it so that 1 becomes 4. This actually needs to be semicolon. 2 becomes a 3. 3 becomes a 2. Okay, 3 becomes a 2. Always remember semicolon, semicolon, important. And so, let's see. And we want to do the same thing for the other variable that is negatively coded, which was fr. We could actually just copy the whole lot, but you know, it's a good typing practice. My data profession, we need to say which one we want to recode. And now we're going to say again 1 equals 4, semicolon, 2 equals 3, 3 equals 2, 4 equals 1. And voila, let's go. If we want to check that this actually worked the way we wanted, we could now go through the whole steps again, create a new data set only with swapping out D and F. Try and do that at home if you want. But right now, what I want to show you how to actually create a new variable. So the satisfaction with the profession, for example, how would that work? We want to create what is called row means, right? So we want to create the mean across these items. We have to tell R now what data set we want to use. So we want to use my data profession, and what variables go into that. Right? So we use C, and we want to use A, we want to use B, we want to use D, R, the recoded one, we want to use F, recoded, and we use H. Once we run this, and then if we go summary, set prof, it now shows us our means, the first quartile, the median, third quartile, and also the maximum. And now if we wanted to, like bring it back together with our original data set, so we could go like my new data, so we create a new object, go cbind, that is the function to merge various different data sets, so we could go set prof and our original data set, my data. And now if I go summary and go my new data, voila, what you should have is right at the beginning a new variable that has our newly computed variable. So to just now annotate what we did here, we set a factor, so a categorical variable. Actually, as an exercise, try and do this for gender. Here we selected variables into a new data set. We computed cron-bus alpha. We recoded data to reverse negatively phrased items. Oops. We computed the scale mean. And finally, we merged our new variable to the old data set. Fantastic! That is it. Don't forget to save it into your awesome R exercise. So like exercise 1 R, and we are done.